I majored in some completely unrelated area when I was at MIT that had nothing to do with computers, and was pretty miserable in that area for my first couple years after I graduated. And one of the people I was rooming with was Mike, who's one of our 3 founders for Boffo. And he was Infocom's tester at that point. Infocom didn't even have an office yet. He was testing out of our living room. And then he went off to business school. And Mark Blank, who was the head of development at Infocom, said, "I need another tester. Would you be interested?" And I said, yes. And I did that for about a year. And then he said, "How would you like to try writing a game?" And I said, "Sure." And spent another year doing that, and that was Planetfall. When I was a kid, I never really perceived myself, or I don't think I was perceived by others, as being particularly funny. And in fact, when I started writing Planetfall, I was not intending to write a comedy adventure game. I was just, intending to write an adventure game, and it was really only after people started playing it, they started saying, "Hey, this is, a lot funnier than any adventure game I've ever played." When Monty Python's Flying Circus came out, I was a big fan of that. So that would have been like the early 70s during my high school years. And I don't know, I'd say another comic influence was Woody Allen. So I was a big fan of his. Saturday Night Live. Nothing too unusual or out of the mainstream. No, not entirely. The most serious game I did for Infocom was one called A Mind Forever Voyaging. So it was quite a different product, and it was very much oriented toward story and not as much toward puzzles, the way traditional adventure games are. And in general, it was not well received by the hardcore Infocom audience, who wanted something, more like, a Zork or a Planetfall. And it was quite against their expectations. Definitely a lot of ideas that I have that I'd like to do that are, non-comedies. Basically, the stage that Boffo is at right now, we're just a developer, not a publisher, and all we can do right now is something that we can interest a publisher in. And the best I can do is sort of pitch them these ideas and say, wouldn't this be cool? But there's no doubt that mostly when publishers think of me and think of Boffo, they think of comedy or humorous games, and at least until the right publisher comes along, or until Boffo is in the position to self-publish, I don't think that'll happen in the short term. For the legend style of games, I'd say there's still about the same amount of writing. For something like Planetfall, for a system like that, where all the dialogue is going to be filmed, there's definitely by by the laws of how much space that takes up. There's definitely not going to be as much space for for dialogue, and the writing is very minimized in that system. I think you could almost take any game design that I did, back as a text adventure, and adapt it, to that same system with, not very significant changes. I didn't know EGA from a hole in the ground, and sort of having to learn everything about graphics almost from scratch was a big learning curve. But just from, sort of from a design standpoint, I didn't find it to be that big a deal, because, as I said, the underlying game was really the same. A lot of people have been calling it Planetfall 2, which is a little weird because I also wrote Stationfall, which was the sequel to Planetfall, so I think of this game more as Planetfall 3. It's Planetfall 2. For a while it was also called the Search for Floyd. I don't suspect that any of the names that anyone has heard so far is going to be what it's actually released under, except it'll certainly have Planetfall in the title somewhere. What we eventually settled on was that the game would take place, significantly further in the future than Stationfall. You wouldn't play the same character. However, it would be set on the same ship, the same spaceship that Stationfall was set on. and you would find the effects of, the player that you played in Planetfall and Stationfall, who of course is long dead, and among his effects, would be, sort of the few remaining parts of Floyd after his destruction. Because the character of Floyd came out so well, and and is so beloved by people even to this day. People come to me and talk about how it was one of the greatest experiences ever playing a computer game for them. It was something that a few people had mentioned that was really good, but I hadn't actually read it myself. And then as people began playing Planetfall, they said, this reminds me a lot of Hitchhikers, you really ought to go and read it. And so it was some point, between when testing began on Planetfall and when the product actually shipped, that I went off and I read Hitchhikers, and of course I loved it. And I did put in a little reference to it in the very beginning of Planetfall. There's an escape pod, and you land on the planet, and after the crash, a panel pops open, and there's a medical kit and a food kit and a towel. And if you look at the towel, it says escape pod number 42. Converting something from another medium to an adventure game was very different. Working with another author in a collaboration is really the only time I've done that. I like doing comedy. It's probably the favorite thing I like to do, and therefore it's not that awful a fate to be doing it most of the time. Well, I would certainly say that nothing about being a game designer, or particularly being a humorous game designer, had anything to do with my earlier career in construction project management. If anything, I would say that I have retained my humor despite that career, since essentially there's nothing about that business that would in fact foster creativity or humor, and in fact many things about it that would wring it out of you given any opportunity in any length of time.